For section 2.2, we're going to still calculate the trigonometric functions of angles, but this time angles are not going to be acute angles. They're going to be non-acute angles. So the first question here is, select the correct choices that complete the sentence below. The value of sine of 240 is negative or positive. So when we think about angle 240, it's more than 180, less than 270. So it's in quadrant 3. In quadrant 3, sine is a negative value because 240 degree is in quadrant 3. And how do I find the reference angle? I need to do 240 minus 180, and then therefore the reference angle must be 60. And then the exact value of sine of 240 will be the same numerical value of sine 60, and sine 60 is root 3 over 2. I believe, yes, it is root 3 over 2, but it is negative root 3 over 2 because it needs to be a negative number. So next question is similar setup, but this time we're going to study with 390. So 390 is more than 360. So the first thing I will do is find the coterminal angle. So 390 minus 360 is 30 degrees, okay? So the value of cosine 390 will be we're going to calculate everything depending on 30 degree. So it will be positive because this is going to still be in quadrant 1. The reference angle will be at 30 degree. And the exact value of cosine of 390 is going to be the same thing as cosine of 30, which is root 3 over 2. And then when I final check this, it will be right. So for question 3, match each angle in column 1 with its reference angle in column 2. So reference angle is, again, if it is already a quadrant 1 angle, its reference angle is itself. If it's an angle in quadrant 2, you do 180 minus the angle. If it is an angle in quadrant 3, you do angle minus 180. And if it is an angle in quadrant 4, you do 360 minus the angle. So for 96, it is 180 minus 96. That's what I need to do, 180 minus 96, which will become 84. 215 is in the third quadrant, so I need to do 215 minus 180, and that will give me a 35 degrees. For negative 150, first I'm going to add 360 to find the coterminal angle. So when we add negative 150 and 360, that makes 210. So I'm going to find the reference angle for 210. So 210 minus 180 will be at 30 degrees. Next one I need is negative 45. Again, because this is a negative angle, I can add 360 to find the coterminal angle. When I add 360, 315 is the coterminal angle. 315 is in the fourth quadrant, so I need to do 360 minus 315, which will give me a 45 degrees. 780 is more than 720, so I'm going to subtract 720 and I will find a 60 degree. So its reference angle will be 60 degrees. 495 is more than 360. So if I subtract 360 from this, I can find a coterminal angle. So when I subtract 360 from 495, I believe I find 235. And then when I subtract 180 from that, I am going to get, so 495 minus 360 is 135. And then the reference angle for 135 will be just 45 degrees. For question 4, it is asking us to complete the missing values for 60. So sine 60 is given, cosine 60 is given. In order to find the tangent value, we have to divide the sine value by cosine value. So this will just give me a root 3 when I divide those two take functions. Cotangent is always reciprocal of tangent. So reciprocal of tangent will be 1 over root 3, which will give me root 3 over 3 as the answer. For question 5, we're going to study with 30 degrees. Sine of 30 is 1 over 2. Cosine is given, tangent is given. So cotangent is always reciprocal of tangent. So it will be 3 over root 3, which just simplifies to a root 3. And cosecant is reciprocal of sine. So reciprocal of 1/2 is just a 2. And then I can find the missing values like this. For question 6, the angle we are studying is 135. So I need to find the reference angle. So if I do 180 minus 135, I'm going to get 45 degrees. So tangent 45 is 1, but that's not my angle. My angle is 135, which is in quadrant 2. And in quadrant 2, tangent is a negative value because one sine is positive, cosine is negative. Cotangent is the exact same thing as tangent for 45. And this is how I can answer 6. For question 7, first thing I'm going to do is the reference angle. So 225 minus 180 is still 45 degrees. So for 45 degrees, cosine is root 3 over 2 without thinking the signs. But I have to make sure that I am also thinking the sine next because the main angle is 225, which is a quadrant 3 angle. In quadrant 3, both sine and cosine, they are negative values. Tangent is positive 1, so cotangent will be positive 1 as well for this question. For question 8, it is asking me to find the reference angle for 330. To find the reference angle, I need to do 360 minus 330, and that will give me a 30 degrees as an answer. Next question is, if I have sine of 330, it will be the same thing as sine of 30, and sine of 30 is 1 over 2, with a difference. Sine of 30 is a positive 1/2, but the 330 is in quadrant 4, and in quadrant 4, the sine values are negative. So the expected answer will be negative 1/2. So this will be cosine of 30, and cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2. For the quadrant 4, cosine value is still positive, so I don't need to add a negative sign there. Tangent is going to be the ratio between these two numbers, so that's just going to give me a negative root 3 over 3. But I have to make sure that when I put negative root 3, I put a space and divide it by 3. That's what the tangent will be. Cotangent is cosine over sine, so when I create a ratio between these two numbers, I will just get negative root 3. Next question is secant of 330. So it will be the reciprocal of cosine. So we already have the cosine value here. When I calculate its reciprocal, it's 2 over root 3. And 2 over root 3, when I rationalize it, it becomes 2 root 3 over 3. Cosecant of 330 is the reciprocal of sine of 330. So this is the sine value. Its reciprocal is just negative 2. So here, I just need to enter a negative 2. So for question 9, you're going to do all this thing for 210. So its reference angle will be 210 minus 180. For 420, if any angle is more than 360, first find the coterminal angle. So when you subtract 360 from this, you find a coterminal angle. And if it is already a quadrant 1 angle, its reference angle is itself, so you can calculate its trigonometric functions. Again, 480 is more than 360. So subtract 360 from this, that's 120. Then calculate the reference angle for 120. 570 is more than 360. First subtract 360 and then find the reference angle for that. If it is 1680, you might have to subtract 360 multiple times to make it an angle which is less than 360 first, then you can find its reference angle. Now, once you know how to find the trig values for any angle, you can evaluate questions like this. So, I need to calculate sine squared 120 minus cosine squared of 120. I'm going to actually copy this question on a board and then show you how I am going to work on these questions. For some reason, it doesn't copy. Okay, so now, first thing I'm gonna find is sine of 120. So sine of 120, its reference angle is 60 degrees. So I'm gonna think about sine of 60, and sine of 60 is something I should be memorizing already, and sine of 60 is √3/2. But 120 is in the second quadrant sine value is still positive, and then we're gonna just square this. Again, the reference angle is 60 degrees, so cosine of 60 is 1/2, but for 120, cosine value will be negative because in quadrant 2, cosines are negative. So when I square √3/2, √3 squared is just 3, 2 squared is 4. And then when I square this, that's 1/4. And when I subtract these two fractions, I get 2/4, which is the same thing as 1/2. So when you see these questions, you're just gonna write here the answer you get. So not only calculating trig functions, you're gonna actually put them in a math statement like this for these questions on this homework. So when we scan the homework, there's a lot of questions that you're gonna do these fun puzzle problems. And then there's questions like this that you need to decide whether the work they're showing us here is true or false. So here, is it gonna be the same value if you find the sine of 30 plus 150, so the total angle will be here 180. So if sine of 180 is the same thing as sine 30 plus sine 150. We're gonna choose false here because these two angles, we can't just, there is no like distribution property, like we don't distribute sine over the parentheses. It doesn't work for trig functions, so this will be a false statement. And then for the next question, cosine squared 90 plus sine squared 90 is equal to 1. We're going to choose that this is true because this is called Pythagorean identity. For any angle, it doesn't have to be 90 degrees. For any angle, sine squared of the angle plus cosine squared of the angle is always equal to 1. And then this one, let's think. You can actually evaluate it. For example, sine of 30 is 1/2. When you multiply 4 by 1/2, that makes 2. But sine of 120 is not equal to 2. In fact, sine and cosine values can never be more than 1, less than -1. So it will be wrong. And then here, tangent squared plus 0, tan squared 0 degrees plus 1 is equal to secant squared 0. This is another version of the Pythagorean identity. For any angle, 1 plus tangent squared of x is always equal to secant squared of x. Now, for these questions, when we have the sine value is given, and then they want us to think, what can be the angle if its sine value is equal to negative root 3 over 2, and I have to consider the whole interval from 0 to 360. So I'm going to think about the angle whose sine value is root 3 over 2. I know that this root 3 over 2, first time we see this fraction, it's 60 degrees, but this is a negative value. So sine is negative only in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. So 60 becomes 60 plus 180, which is 240 in quadrant 3. And 60 becomes 300 in quadrant 4. So these two angles will have this sine value. And I'm just thinking backwards this time. So this tangent value, root 3 over 2, root 3 over 3. So that means sine value must be root 3 over 2, root 3 over 2. And this is actually a rationalized ratio. So this is the same thing as 1 over root 3. So that means the sine value is 1/2 and cosine value is root 3 over 2. Sine is equal to 1/2 only for 30 degrees. So this will be an angle related to 30 degrees. But tangent value is negative, so tangent is negative only in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. So 30 becomes 150 in quadrant 2, and 30 becomes 330 in quadrant 4. So if this is the secant value, this is the same thing as 2 over root 3. Its reciprocal is root 3 over 2, so cosine value is root 3 over 2. Cosine is root 3 over 2 only for 30 degrees. So 30 degrees is going to have the cosine value of root 3 over 2. And cosine is also positive on the fourth quadrant. So 330 is going to have the same value. So cosine is root 2 over 2. This is a very famous angle. That is going to be 45 degrees because cosine of 45 is root 2 over 2. But there is one more angle who's going to have the same cosine value, and it's a positive number. Cosine is positive in the first quadrant and fourth quadrant. So 315 degree uses 45 as a reference angle in quadrant 4. Okay, so if cosecant is 2, that means sine value of the angle is 1 over 2. And sine is equal to 1 over 2 only for 30 degrees and 150 degrees. For these two angles, their sine value is 1 over 2. That makes their cosecant value to be a positive 2. If tangent is negative root 3 over 3, this is the same thing as 1 over root 3. So that means the sine value has to be 1/2. Sine value is 1/2 for 30 degree as a reference angle, but this is a negative tangent. So it's only possible in the second quadrant and on the third quadrant. And both of these angles will use 30 degree as a reference angle. We had this question before, I believe. If cosecant is 2, sine must be 1/2. If sine is 1/2, that belongs to 30 degree and 150 degrees for this question. And this is the end of section 2.8.